Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining and welcome to this week's Product People live stream. Before starting, please remember that you can watch this stream on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitch. And also a reminder that this talk will be recorded and it will be available on YouTube, so you can watch it afterwards and also share that with your community. We will be also running Slido so that you can ask us questions and we can also gather some insights, get some polls. For that, you can scan the QR code or you can go to slido.com and put in this code that you see on the screen. With that, let's move to today's topic. Today's topic is beyond product market fit, scale, systems, and customer love. So imagine, you've nailed product market fit, but now the real work, begins. This talk will talk about, what happens beyond the product market fit. How do you scale without breaking, building systems, have sustainable growth, and, have your customers keep on loving and investing in your product. And you will be expecting some concrete lessons on what to stop doing, what to formalize, and where you need to be very deliberate. And today's speaker is Thomas Mintoff. He is a product director at Flagstone with over 12 years of experience in product, including time at GSK, building tools for global finance teams across Europe, Asia, and Americas. He has spent the last 6 years helping Flagstone move from a fintech startup to a scale up and delivering year-on-year profitability and growing to 20 billion in assets under administration. So, starting as one of the first product managers in the org, he now leads a team of 16, and hence he is the perfect person to deliver this talk today. Before I hand over the floor to Thomas, a bit about me. I'm a senior consultant at Product People, and I have over 8 years of product management and software engineering experience. You can see on my profile the kind of like companies I worked with across B2B, B2C, C2C, and NGOs. So a lot of diverse experience that we get at Product People. And if you want to, you can always connect with me on LinkedIn. A little about Product People as a company. So we provide interim product management, product ops, and transformation acceleration. We have our in-house staff, and we give back to the community by hosting one of Europe's largest, product management communities, which has over 60,000 members. So this is how we are giving back to the community. And with that, actually, let's dive into one quick icebreaker to get to know our audience, and then we will jump into the talk itself. So, the question is on the screen. In terms of product market fit, where do you believe your product is today? So, option number A is you're still chasing product market fit. Option number B is you have found product market fit, but now you're wrestling with scale. C is you're scaling, but you're losing the customer intimacy that got you there. And D is not sure anymore, and you're hoping this talk helps you. You can answer to this question by going to Slido. You can scan the QR code, or you can go to slido.com and put in the code that you see on the screen. And we will wait, let's say, a minute for the answers to come in. And with that, we will then jump into the talk. I am assuming there will be very interesting answers. I'm particularly leaning towards customer intimacy. Like, okay, how do companies measure that, or do they even track it? Okay, we have some prelim answers. First is, so there's a 50-50 split. 50% are, not really sure anymore. It's like, maybe this stock helps. And then 50% are still chasing product market fit. So it's between A and D at the moment. Maybe wait a couple more seconds to see if there's any changes in the result. But already interesting insights about this 50-50 split between A and D. Okay, now a bit of a shift. 25% for still chasing product market fit, and 75% are not sure anymore. So that's a great signal. And with that, I will now pass the floor to Thomas. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Furkan. And yeah, thanks very much for having me, Product People team. Yeah, pleasure to be here today. Yeah, really interesting to hear from on that survey, right? One of the reasons I put this presentation together initially, and I've delivered this a couple of times at a few other places, is that I noticed there's a lot of content out there about product market fit. How do I know I've got it? How do I get it? But not a lot around, okay, what do you do once you've got product market fit? And there's maybe this misunderstanding that, okay, once you've got product market fit, the rest is easy and everything just magically comes together, and you create this unicorn of or an organization. And part of the reason I put this together is really kind of to demystify that and talk about actually this is where the hard work kicks in, right? So hopefully that's something people get out of this. For those of you that are still trying to get product market fit, this is still super useful because thinking ahead and the sorts of challenges that will be coming. And for those of you that are unsure, obviously hopefully this brings that to life, and you get a bit of a better understanding where you might be after this presentation. So just a quick reminder, maybe for those of you who don't know, like the term product market fit essentially describes that moment when a startup finally finds a widespread set of customers that resonate with its product. And it's kind of been earmarked in a lot of different sources, but the lean startup is a really popular one where this is referenced. And it's a very key thing in the world of product, right? A lot of people point to product market fit as this really, really important metric. And that's a metric is essentially based around how would a customer feel if they could no longer use your product, right? And it's a scale of disappointment with that magic number that you're trying to get being 40% plus. And anything over 40% is a really strong indicator that you've got good product market fit, right? Because more people would be really disappointed that they can't use your product. So this is kind of like the maths behind it. I definitely would say product market fit is an art more than a science, right? So not to get sort of too hep on numbers, but this is a really key thing in product and something a lot of people point to, right? One part of that is that if you don't have a product that resonates with people, then this is believed to be, one of the top reasons, if not the top reasons, why startups fail, right? There's no market need. So if you're not confident in having that product market fit and solving a real problem for your customers and users, then the odds of success obviously dramatically decrease, right? So making sure you've got that is really key for any product person and product organization. So just before we move on, just a little bit about myself. We touched on it a bit at the beginning. So I'm currently the product director at Flagstone. We're a fintech based in London. We're a cash deposit platform. So you can think of us a bit like a one-stop shop for where you can open up cash savings and get optimal rates and full FSCS protection. And there's lots of benefits to that, right? And I came into Flagstone having worked at a very large org in GlaxoSmithKline, a large UK-based pharmaceutical company. So you could say pharmaceuticals have a pretty good product market fit globally, and that lots of people need them and use them. And I transitioned into a much smaller org at the time, which was Flagstone. And when I moved into that company, I kind of went into it thinking, okay, right, let's, make sure we're really clear on do we have good product market fit? How can I make sure we've got the right product proposition? And one of the things that really dawned on me straight away was actually we had product market fit, right? Like that wasn't a problem for us. Like the founders had established this amazing product that really resonated with users and problems and opportunities in the cash deposit space. And my mind sort of had to quickly shift from, okay, this is not about necessarily trying to sort of change the proposition dramatically, but more how can we make the most out of this product market fit and really double down on it, right? Which definitely changes the mental model of how you tackle those challenges. So in this presentation, I'm going to go through like 3 key areas where I think, just based on my learnings, it's really important to call out this is not, a Bible of sort of what to do. I appreciate different organizations have different shapes, different types of products. These are just learning from my experience that I've personally felt have been really useful, and I wish someone had laid these out to me when I started. And hopefully all of you can take something away from the presentation today and use that in your daily working lives as well. So the first one I'm going to talk around is really around scale and how you lay those foundations for growth, right? This might sound pretty obvious, and the temptation might be, okay, I've got product market fit now, I'm just going to throw loads of money at marketing and grow, right? And we'll get onto that in a moment, but just as the sort of the plant pot on the right hand side is showing, it's really important that you set yourself up for scale, right? And that you can actually handle that growth, as well as looking for those right distribution channels. So when you think about this area, it's about thinking around your operational foundation. So how can I make sure that I can sustain growth, right? And then it's around how you build up the momentum. So how can I turn that product market fit into pull, right? How can I actually bring customers into the product, make sure they're aware of it and know about this amazing thing that we're offering, right? So when we talk about operational foundations and sustainable growth, again, this might sound super obvious, but it's such a critical thing to try and solve early, like in your journey of getting PMF, right? Because as you can see from the diagram on the screen, right, you've got this sort of rapid growth cycle, and you maybe don't have scalable operations. That might be around how you're onboarding customers, how you're servicing customers, how you're handling payments. It depends on your product, of course, but there's lots of sort of operational needs to products. And if you don't have that scalability, you're going to hit those bottlenecks. The customer experience is going to start going down the pan, right? And this is where all those negative outcomes start building up. And before you know it, that has a very damaging effect on your brand, your product perception, and that product market fit that you've worked so hard to get is very much undermined, right? Because it's now got a lot of this negative sentiment around it. And that's really important, because you then go from this rapid growth opportunity just into, okay, I've got this product market fit, but actually nothing's scalable and I'm not able to achieve this rapid growth. So something that is sometimes overlooked but is important to do ASAP essentially is make sure that you've got that scalable base to grow, right? Because if you end up in a situation where, for example, you're having to have a conversation with your marketing team and, okay, we need to turn off digital ads or whatever it might be because we don't think we can handle the load of onboarding that week, then you're in a serious problem, right? Because you're leaving money on the table, users on the table, and that's a real missed opportunity. And that's definitely not a place you want to be in. And that kind of segues quite nicely, right, into this concept of how you can convert that fit into pull. So something that I see in a lot of product managers that is, a big assumption is that if I build this amazing product, right, and I'll point to great examples, right, the most recent one being the OpenAIs and Claudes of the world at the moment, where there was this big sort of AI moment, went live and it went totally viral, right? It's like, if you build it, they will come. Now, yes, that example I'm calling out there, that's happened, but that's actually a very rare thing, right? We're talking about really, really, really like extreme examples there. And it's actually a really dangerous assumption to just assume that if you build something amazing, users are just going to naturally find out about it. It's going to go viral tomorrow and everyone will flock to it, right? It's so important to think about, okay, how can I partner with the likes of my marketing and growth teams to consider, how we're actually going to get this thing out there and how we're going to distribute it. When I first joined my organization, we didn't have the marketing team or the brand that we have today, right? And we had to work very hard to get it to where it is now. And that's something that I definitely wish I'd invested more time and effort as a product manager, partnering with those functions earlier on. And when you think of being a product manager in this space and how you're trying to, get your product out there, it's really important to be really specific and intentional in how you do that. So, on the left-hand side, I've got this product manager kind of flinging all the darts at the dartboard versus the chap on the right, being much more targeted in what he's doing. And that's no different, right, in terms of how you market your product, right? Having focused, intentional marketing and thinking about who your product speaks to and how you get it in front of them is super, super important. And building that relationship with your brand and marketing team is so important. I appreciate this is probably a bit out of date now, but a diagram that I love to point to as well is this sort of Microsoft Teams versus Slack conversation. So everyone you talk to, and I apologize if there's any Microsoft people on this call today, but there's this general sentiment that, I really love Slack. Everyone who speaks very positively of Slack. Microsoft Teams gets a bit of a hard time sometimes from people in organizations. But when you actually look at the adoption of these, and these metrics again were sort of pre the Salesforce acquisition, Microsoft just has the distribution, right? Their strategy in terms of how they're getting their product out there and the distribution channels for that have a huge effect, right? You can see that here in the daily active users, right, of Slack versus Teams back in 2020. And that's something, again, to be really considerate about, is how are you going to distribute your product, not just about, okay, I've got this amazing thing and therefore it has earned the right for everyone to use it and they'll just come to it organically. That's quite a rare thing to have. So when we think about this, it's really important to think how distribution is key and be really intentional in how you market and how you distribute your product. Sorry, actually, just before I move on to that, I think the other bit that was a really big learning for me, and again, I would echo to people on this call, is that making investments in this, and that can be through things like econometrics models or other, data models, is something, again, that is really key in this, right? Investing in data early to help with this targeting. So again, it's kind of like big go-to-market. I'm not talking about go-to-market of individual features within the products, but actually how you're getting your entire product proposition to market. That's such a powerful thing to do, and again, one to be cognizant of early on in this journey. So the second area I wanted to call out was around systems. And when I talk about systems, I'm actually talking about technical systems, but also your teams, right? So again, based on my experience, something that's very important to have front in mind, is looking at your legacy debt and really being brave, right? It's never a good time. We'll talk about that a bit more, but staring at legacy debt in the face. The other one is around how you create like true cross-functional teams. And I'll talk a bit more around what I mean by that. And then the third one is culture. So I didn't want to just focus on, systems in terms of technical systems here, but also systems in terms of how you work as a team and the culture in your organization. That is so important in a world post-product market fit. So if we first talk about the legacy debt piece, so I always like sort of looking at this image of Indiana Jones, right? Because it's so often that you have these organizations out there that, especially when they're in startup mode, right, and the founders were working to achieve this product market fit, now you sometimes have to take a few shortcuts, right, especially if we're trying to get it out there and prove the thing works. And with that, debt can build up, and sometimes it can consist of, okay, we'll fix those things, or we might need to migrate totally to a new system. I've been in those challenges before where we've had to go from an original system into, a sexy new event-driven architecture or whatever it might be. And it can be easy to keep deferring this. And, in the case of Indiana Jones here, not grabbing the gold statue because you're too worried that if you grab it, this might happen. And, everything is going to come crashing down. All that sort of good intent you had with your customers has now disappeared. Because you've obviously got to do this in a silent way, but it will never be a good time, and it will stop you in terms of what we talked around on the scale element. And it will also stop you in that growth element, right? So how you want to double down on that product market fit and expand your product, it will always hold you back. And you will always look back on it in a year, 2 years time, grateful that you spent that difficult period nailing that legacy debt, right? I don't think I've ever met someone who hasn't gone and tackled that and, you know, sat back and wish they hadn't, right? So there's a lot that you can learn here. And something I would suggest is actually, we talk a lot in the world of product around, you know, product managers versus project managers. And when you're looking at these kind of big legacy debt type initiatives, I've really seen good examples where product and project management can live in harmony and really work well together to nail those. So that's something I would say is worth calling out as well. So the other bit when I talk about sort of scaling systems and teams is around real cross-functional teams. So something that I've operated in for a long time at my current organization is we operate a tribe and squads model. And again, we're not, you know, we did not come up with this. This was originally coined from Spotify, I believe. And this was around how you support cross-functional teams. And the aim being that a squad can focus on a very specific problem with cross-functional resources. But when I talk about real cross-functional teams, I'm talking about going beyond just that product trio, right? Where you might have product design, engineering, you know, some will bring data into the picture as well. But I'm talking about even going wider than that, right? Your squad consisting of marketing, of brand, maybe you've got sales or compliance in there, and truly making this team that has all the resources it needs to solve said problem. And that would depend on the domain of the problem, right? Maybe it's a payments problem, maybe it's a conversion problem, maybe it's an operational problem. But truly giving them like that resource helps build autonomous teams that again can take that product market fit and run with it, right, at scale. It can take a long time to find the right structure, and you're always iterating on that structure. So just to be clear, like it's taken us years to get to a model that we're in today, and it's not a one size fits all. It depends on the nature of your product. It depends on the nature of your business model. But having all those necessary functions in the team is really important, and you almost form a product collective rather than a product trio. The other thing that's really key about this is that it can set you up for success in terms of how you can meet strategy in the middle. So something I'm very big on is that if you're going to set up this way, you need to give the squads the autonomy to do the work that they feel is the right thing to do. So having that high level business strategy set, disseminating, okay, these are the key problems we need to solve to hit that business strategy, and then empowering the squads to solve said problems has worked really well, right? Because you're meeting in the middle in terms of the strategy and problems to solve and building that autonomy and how they actually solve those problems. And something when you're thinking about the organization of your teams and, you know, how to set it up in a way to make the most of your product market fit and make the business and products a success is, you know, there's a lot of writing around there, like team topologies, for example, around how you might want to structure your teams around your code bases and so on. And, you know, I think there's been books from Amazon, for example, where they've talked a lot about this as well. And I think the most important piece to bear in mind is that it will never be 100% perfect, right? It is incredibly difficult to get all those things to line up where you have this perfect organizational structure where squad A will never be dependent on squad B. You can do a huge amount to remove those dependencies, but there will always be small gaps that you have to prepare for. And I think as long as you structure around the problems and consider the organization and, you know, the code base to a certain extent, it's okay for it to not be 100% perfect. And, you know, if you can have strong relationships between that product collective that I talked about, that's worth its weight in gold, right? And I guess just also being really open to change. I see a lot of organizations as well where they don't like changing org structure or looking out to sort of plug those gaps, and having a really open mindset to this is also really key. Yeah, and I guess the other bit to call out here, sorry, I forgot to put this in, was around this tribe and squad structure. Something I found that also works really well is that it's really important to note that it does not mean that you have decision by committee or that all stakeholders are happy. By empowering these teams and having this single-threaded leadership throughout it, so having strong individuals who can lead those squads or lead those tribes, which a bit of a side note, it's actually a really great career opportunity. So if you have the opportunity to do something like that, I highly recommend it. That does not mean, therefore, okay, we're in this world where everyone has to be super happy of everything and it's all flowers and sunshine. There is still a level of decision making being made and led in those autonomous units. So it's worth calling that outright. It's still those difficult priority calls to be made, and that is okay. That is natural and that is normal. The aim here is to solve the problem. That's the ultimate goal. And then that takes me on to the third point, which is around culture. And this is just so important, right? Your company needs to have, and your organization needs to have an amazing culture to make the most of said product market fit and really be, love the product themselves as well and believe in it. So I point to what I'm calling the video. So an experience that I had once was that we had a customer send us a 23-minute video, which was essentially them sort of going through the platform, giving feedback on everything that they would improve, we're not happy with, etc. And, as a product person, initial feeling might be a bit sort of a painful one. You're like, oh God, I've got like this, this person has taken 23 minutes out of their day to go and literally record like footage of the product and go to all this effort, which, to be clear, nobody wakes up in the morning thinking, okay, that's how I really want to spend my day today. I want to do a video footage of my bank and send it to them. This is someone who feels incredibly passionate about the product, right? And if you have a high performing product team, they will actually lick their lips at something like this, right? Not necessarily, they won't jump to being defensive and trying to justify, well, they don't understand, we have this tech there, or whatever it might be. They will look at this as not a horror show, but an amazing opportunity, because this in itself is proof of your PMF, right? Because this person feels so strongly about the product that they want it to, be even better, because they understand that this is something that they want and need. And then this is just gold dust, right? That you've got this much detail to jump into and literally go and make the most of your product and potentially, look at those changes, improve it, etc. Right? So how this comes back to culture is that if you've got a product team that look at this and see it in that positive way, that's a really important aspect, right? Because if you go down the defensive route, that's almost like, misleading yourself and being a bit guilty of, thinking too much of your own product. This is the sort of thing that really you can make the most of when you're in that situation of having a strong product market fit. So it definitely should be seen as a blessing, and I highly recommend that that's the sort of culture you should raise in your product team. The other piece is around, it's really important to hire for culture. So finding those people who, can switch lanes and are happy to do so. When you're in that sort of startup to scale up mode that I've been in, but I think this is probably also prevalent in slightly larger organizations as well. Being able to switch lanes and take on those different tasks, like we mentioned about working with marketing and distribution, etc., is so valuable. And that's a really important mindset to have. It's also important to note that seniority does not equal high performance, right? When you're hiring for culture, it can be easy to fall into this trap of, okay, I'm just going to hire really senior people because I need really great people to, move this thing along. And that's not the case, right? Again, hiring for culture means hiring for people that will fit that culture, have the right mental attitude to drive things forward, forge a new way, own the space, and be agnostic to switching lanes, right? And that can be at all levels of seniority, not just at super senior level. The other one is around embedding culture. So again, I'm a strong believer that it's never too early to build career pathways and look at ways to motivate and inspire people through like those career frameworks. So, you know, in this world where you've gained product market fit and you're growing rapidly, it's more than ever really important to make sure there is that clear pathway for, you know, what great performance looks like and how people can move through that trajectory. Because that can really inspire people, and you not only get more from the team, but it creates a great work ethic across the team and real transparency in how they can grow with the product. And then the last one is obviously living the culture, right? As a leader in the organization, you need to demonstrate it day in, day out, and also be held to account on it. And I can't echo that enough, right? If you can nail all of these and create a really strong culture, that will help you, you know, prevail through tough times, like I mentioned, like getting through that legacy debt, for instance, earlier, and through the good times where your product is flying. So then the last piece to talk around really is like how you stay close to your customers at scale. So, you know, you may have been in this world where when you were very small, it's really easy to talk to your users every single day. Maybe there's not as many users, maybe there's not as many sort of go-betweens between you and the user. And that can easily, you know, dilute as you grow. So when I'm thinking about this, there's sort of three parts to it, right? One is like cutting through the noise, which will come on some examples of what I mean with that. The other is around this concept of eating your dog food and not drinking your champagne. A lot of you might be familiar with the term of dog fooding in product, which is using your own product. And I'll double down on that in a moment. And the last one is around network effect and actually using your internal users. So cutting through the noise, right? If you think about it from this lens, right, we've built the foundations, we've got all the impact multipliers in place. Now we assume that we just watch, you know, the money rolling, because we've got product market fit, right? We must not forget our fundamentals of understanding our customers and the problems we want to solve, especially as we start bolting on additional features and think about the next stage for our product, right? Having product market fit doesn't mean there are no longer, you know, there are no problems left to solve for our customers. More customers means more feedback, which actually means more difficult decisions to make. And I'll show you a really good example here of, you know, where I learned that sort of cutting through the noise was really important. So this picture on the slide is just an example from like our Flagstone product, right? It's a very simple graph where users can use it as a way to view different deposit accounts and essentially choose deposits based on interest rate versus the risk profile of those banks, right? So it's very easy to sort of see within those segments whether you want sort of a low risk profile and how high a rate you want. Now, when we did our migration, one of the things that we were thinking about was, okay, do we need this in our new platform, right? Is this like a must-have feature, or is this something, you know, typical, like can we cut scope and try and deliver something to market faster? All of our data pointed to, okay, you know what, this is not a must-have feature, right? Adoption is not necessarily like through the roof on this, and, you know, with my good product manager hat on, put that proposal that, you know, we could go to market X weeks quicker if we didn't ship this. Now, when I think about cutting through the noise, is that by not having this, there are actually very vocal clients who are frustrated by the lack of this graph, right? And I'm not necessarily saying like the entire customer base shouted about this, but what we did not exactly pinpoint was that the customers that this, you know, did feel strongly about this were very high value users. They were power users, people that used our platform regularly. And that did have, you know, a big impact. And even hearing that feedback, how passionate clients were about this, was really impactful. And this is a great example where we probably looked at the data a bit through too much of a two-dimensional lens and didn't sort of cut through the noise and see that actually, if we'd been more specific in how we'd analyze that and looked at the usage, we'd have seen how impactful that this feature would have been, right? And that's something in a sort of smaller customer cohort, and less mature customer base would have been easier to identify. But in this model, we overlooked it, right? So again, being able to like cut through that noise within the data and really pinpoint what matters to the customer is really key. And that would take sort of multi-dimensional analysis to understand that. So the other one is around eating your own dog food and not drinking champagne. So I think everyone here, you know, a great product person will often, you know, use their own product, right? You'd be mad not to like be hands-on in your own product, even if it's not, you're not necessarily like the target client for it, right? Dog fooding is, you know, a really common practice within the product sphere, and the trap that you can definitely fall into, especially in a world where you have product market fit, is that you use the product and you instantly just assume everything is great and amazing, right? Like you fall into this trap of, okay, I'm just doing happy paths for all these pieces without even realizing, right? Because you're in the product day to day, you know that your PMF is high. So you sort of build this false safety net, and it's very much a trap, right? It's so easy that you've actually started drinking your own champagne rather than purely dog fooding the product. Part of that can maybe, you know, this depends a lot on what your product is, right? And again, you know, I think about some of my experience currently at Flagstone, where myself, I might not be like the target demographic for that product. You know, there's a number of ways that you have to try and think creatively of how you can replicate the emotion that drives the behavior of the reality of that product. So in our example of Flagstone, you know, we've got clients moving large sums of money, right? So, you know, I might be in a test environment moving a large sum of money, but that's incredibly different to someone who's literally moving their life savings, right? From one institution to another. You know, you don't face the same sense of jeopardy as that person, and you can definitely fall into that trap of equating your own personal experience to the clients, which might not just be the same. I'd also acknowledge that like the whole company should look at trying to dog food the product, not just the product teams. This goes back to my point on culture, right? I'm always shocked at the number of candidates that I interview and they've never even attempted to like onboard or use the product. Like, I feel it's such a big miss and something that can be easily overlooked. So when you are using it, try and get out of this trap. Create those hypotheticals for yourself and really examine every micro interaction, right? It's about being really specific and intentional again, and taking nothing for granted when you're using the product. Think outside the box when you're using it, and maybe, you know, really think about your core demographic when you're using it as well. Do not become a victim of your own product market fit. And then the last one is around network effect, right? So we've talked about this concept of, you know, you've scaled your users, you've scaled your organization, you've got more people interacting, you know, to interact with. So actually outside of your product team, you now have probably a larger sales team, a larger operationals and customer service team. Like, that means there are more people in your organization that have more touch points with customers than ever before. Whereas, you know, when you might have first started in the organization, there might have just been a handful of you to talk to customers. You've now got a plethora of people, right, that can talk to users. And that's a network effect that you can tap into across the organization, right? I talked about getting everyone to sort of dog food the product, but there's also how can you tap into these operations, sales teams, etc., research teams, to really accumulate all this knowledge of how your users are using it. And that's not just through data, right? I've seen really great examples where you have reviews of customer service calls, like bringing people together, sales calls, getting everyone entrenched in understanding what the customer complaints are and being really transparent in those complaints. Trustpilot and contact sentiment is another great one. I could probably walk up to anyone in our organization and talk about Trustpilot, and they would know what our score is, what some of the latest feedback is. That's such an accessible way to, you know, keep your finger on the pulse of like what your users are feeling and thinking about your product. And even just making things like research playbacks totally open to your entire organization, right? creating really low friction ways for people to understand, what we're talking to customers about and what customers are saying really adds to the culture, and again amplifies learning of your customers. Um, people tend to like sharing, right? They like learning, and again, if you've built that culture we talked about earlier and nailed some of the elements of what I've mentioned in this presentation, this should come quite naturally, right? People will be passionate to share. Oh, I spoke to Joe Blogs, the customer, the other day, and they made a really interesting point around this missing feature. Like, that's so empowering and exciting, and if you can build up that buzz, then that's really powerful. And you can never ever over communicate. I'm such a big believer that you need to say something like 10 times before it sinks in. There can never be too much over communication, especially when you're moving fast. So yeah, that brings me to the end of my presentation. I've lost track of time slightly, so hopefully I've not overrun too much. But just to summarize, right, when we're talking about a world where you've got product market fit and what happens next, there's really a lot to consider, right? It's very much the beginning. How can you turn that momentum that requires a lot across your entire organization and not just a product team? So, how do you make sure that you create that space to grow and lay that foundation, be it through operationally down to service the company, to actually generating that pool that I talked about? How can you create systems that multiply? And that might be technical systems and staring that debt in the face, all the way through to how you build that culture that can help multiply impact. And then it's staying close to your customers, right? Leveraging that network effect, making sure that you don't fall into that trap of drinking your own champagne. So yeah, hopefully everyone found this useful. I do think it's also worth calling out that it also requires quite a big personal journey and personal learnings. If you've not done it before, like going from that world of trying to get product market fit to turning that into momentum now that I've got it, and you learn countless lessons on the way. There's lots of different learnings for different domains. So again, this is not a one size fits all, but hopefully this was helpful.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tom. This was indeed very helpful and a lot of really valuable lessons for the audience. We'll be jumping into Q&A right now. For the audience, you can push your questions through Slido. So the QR code again on the screen, and also you can go into slido.com and put in the code. While we gather all of the questions very quickly, I will walk us through what we do as product people, the kind of cases that we cover. So firstly, we provide interim or fractional support. So somebody needs coverage for 3 to 6 months, or have interim, let's say, need for parental coverage, or they're important and urgent initiatives. Somebody is off sick, so we can come in and provide support on that. We also provide coaching and advisory consultancy. So think about product ops, program management, and these are the things that we have a lot of experience with. And lastly, product discovery. So if you are, let's say, thinking about the next big thing or doing something 0 to 1, then we can also come in and support on that front, leveraging all of the knowledge and experience that we have across different industries. You can see very quickly our selected B2C clients, big names such as Aventum, eBay, Cosia, and many more. And on the B2B side as well, we have worked with Localize, Pliant, WHO, and a bunch of other really big names. And we have overall supported more than 690 teams. We have in-house 40 product leaders and product managers, and we are very proud that 59% of them are women. And with that, I will now look into the questions that we have and pass them over to Tom. So the first question that we have is, how would the transition for a medium-sized company happen without squads to squads? So how do you do this, like, no structure of a squad into a squad structure?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think for me, it starts with that business and product strategy element that I mentioned. So first of all, being really clear and understanding, okay, what is the strategy? What are the problems that we need to solve? And then thinking about the structure around those problems, right? That if I was to, get a blank piece of paper today and even just try and digest how we could go from sort of no squads to squads, that would be where I would start, right? And there'll be lots of variants of that, and there'll probably be a few stakeholders you want to discuss that with, from engineering to sales, etc. But that would be my first starting point, right? Because if you can't delegate the right problems to your kind of to be squads, then you won't be able to set up in the right way. And it's actually making sure that you're aligned on the right problems, because it can also bring a really good conversation to the table if people tend to start disagreeing on what should actually be solved and what we should be putting resource behind.
Perfect. Thank you so much for the answer, Tom. Second question, which is very related to the first one, is how do you see the idea of these cross-functional squads evolving in the era of AI and product builders?
Yeah, I thought there might be an AI question come up. It's hard to avoid it these days. So I don't necessarily have the answer for this. I'm also a big believer in this. Moving towards this kind of like builder mentality. I think more if you think about in that cross-functional team, let's call it like that product collective I talked about, you will start to see more of a blurring of roles, right? Like product managers who can do a bit more design, who can maybe push a PR and so on. And we see that in our organization at the moment where some of those are blurring, but that doesn't necessarily negate the need for a collective, right? There is still domain expertise required in certain areas. So for example, like this concept of having the right like taste when it comes to design and how important that is. So all I see is those teams being more highly efficient. Maybe you can have smaller product collectives versus what you have today. But I don't necessarily see that disappearing. It just might change the slight makeup like of those squads and those product collectives.
Awesome. And since you also talked a lot about culture, what is your number one advice to nurture great culture? And what exactly are the questions that you particularly ask when you're hiring for culture?
Gosh, this is a really tough question. What's my number one advice to nurture great culture? Because a lot goes into it, right? Like you definitely need to treat culture like a priority at a company level. When I take Flagstone as an example, like our CEO at the time really invested a lot in that, right? To getting a chief people officer in very early and really making that a core part of like our company level objectives in terms of how we nurture that culture. So I think that in itself, just prioritizing it is really important. And again, like communicating on that. Like everyone in my organization can name like the three core like culture principles that we want to work to. They are fundamental to how we assess performance. We very much like equally weight that to deliverables, and really double down on that. So I think taking it seriously is super important if you're actually going to nurture it. And then in terms of like questions that I ask to hire for culture, I'm maybe a little bit biased. Like I talked about this, being able to switch lanes. I focus a lot on like people's ability to do that, right? And how you can really act as an owner. I'm a big believer that if you can find an individual who's willing to take ownership, they've got that drive, they don't necessarily see like the walls and boundaries of like their role, then they can do great things, right? I think that is so key, and especially going back to the other question, this AI era of builders, where actually those lines are becoming more blurry. Like those are the people, like those generalists, I think will really thrive. And they're the sorts of things I look for in how I target my questions when I'm looking at hires for culture.
Perfect. Amazing. Tom, the last question. Like you talked about the network effects. So if the company or you as a product manager don't have much time, what is the most important action that you can take towards network effects?
Yeah, I think for me it comes back to that reducing the friction, right? Of terms of like how everyone can like tap into that feedback, right? That's coming into all those different areas of your team. So again, it will depend a bit like on your product and how maybe you get feedback, because B2C might be very different to B2B, etc. But even small things, right? Like if your organization uses Dovetail, make that fully accessible to everyone. Like there's no reason why like everyone shouldn't be able to access that, and understand where to go to like see those research and insights. It might be promoting how like you view Trustpilot and getting everyone really understanding of like tapping into that every day, right? It might be um, quite literally having calls out themes from customer support and listening to those calls, right? There's lots of low effort ways that you can do this and like create that network effect that goes beyond just you, right, but across your whole team. So I think it's about how you can lower those friction points.
Perfect. Amazing. Thank you so much, Tom, for firstly the talk and the lessons, and also then answering the questions from the audience. Before we conclude, for the audience, a couple of QR codes. Firstly, we at Product People are hiring, and you've seen the different cases that we solve. So if you're interested, please scan the QR code. And you can also subscribe to our newsletter so that you can receive inspiring product stories and insights based on all of the experiences that we have. And before we say goodbye, just a reminder that again, we will be meeting next week with the topic Who Gets Left Behind? Ethics and Power in Product Decisions by Caroline Nito. And with that, thank you so much. I hope everyone had a good day and this talk was really helpful for them. See you all then. Bye bye.